Okay. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit now, but this next will not be on the test. I want to spend about a minute talking about it. What eventually happened with China. Chiang Kai-shek took over, and Chiang Kai-shek was opposed by Mao Zedong. Then they fought each other for a while, Chiang and Mao. Then the Japanese came in, and in World War II, the United States helped China defeat Japan. Then after World War II, the fighting between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong resumed, with Mao Zedong winning. And today, China is still a communistic country, the last big one, and they are at odds with the United States. That's my summing up what happened in brief. The rich, prosperous China they hope to set up has not materialized. And also, does anybody know what country in this world is by far the most polluted country as far as carbon dioxide emissions and smog? China. And 1/10, I've heard, of Los Angeles pollution comes all the way across the 10,000 miles of Pacific Ocean, starts in China. As if Los Angeles does not have enough pollution of its own. All right.
Isn't it so bad that they have to there are people there who just sell air?
I believe that's right. I mean, some, but they do, some of them wear masks.
Yeah.
They do sell gas mask plant. Okay, folks, because it's more than halftime, everybody take about 10 minutes, be back at about 25 after. Okay. Okay. Now, in the case of Japan, they were going to lock themselves in and lock foreigners out. For a while, they only had diplomatic relations with Korea. And one time, an American ship had got into trouble and tried to land at a Japanese port, and it was fired upon. Well, President Millard Fillmore, who's somewhat regarded as the least of our presidents, but nevertheless, the one outstanding thing he did at this point, he sent Commodore Perry with a fleet of American ships to Japan on a friendly mission. This fleet of ships carried a telegraph or a small railroad, in other words, with a steam engine. It actually worked. And they showed off Western items to the Japanese. And the Japanese were highly impressed. The telegraph that could send messages for miles and miles. The railroad that could carry a large amount of goods overland. The Japanese were impressed. The Japanese began to realize that they had better start changing their ways. So they began to westernize. They went through the really, really painful process of industrialization. Now, what do I mean by painful? Well, my great aunt could tell you that she really was upset when her daddy abandoned his farm and went to the factory and had to work 12-hour days, 6 days a week, 72 hours a week. Only got Sundays off at the factory. And she said, I never saw my daddy anymore. Well, I mean, and a lot of persons think that the factories have done a lot to break up families, that where children don't see their parents or whatever. Well, the Japanese experience this also. The process of industrialization has proven painful. A lot of your small Japanese farmers went out of business, but again, this was part of becoming Western. They devised a government that appeared to be parliamentary. In other words, trying to copy what they'd seen from Great Britain and France and even the United States, even though the real power rested in the hands of few. But the old nobility, the hereditary nobility, they did destroy. It appeared to be democratic, but Japan was very authoritarian, and this, folk, a lot of people say is true of Japan, even in the year 2019. Appear to be democratic, but actually is autocratic. Taxes were heavy. A lot of farmers who lost their farms went to the cities where they provided cheap labor under very difficult working conditions. The Japanese, though, they began to play baseball and do dances. And a lot of American baseball players will go to Japan and play in the Japanese leagues for a while and come back, hopefully they think having sharpened up their skills. And some Japanese players have made the United States baseball teams down through the years. And some of them have actually achieved a little bit of stardom, at least for a short time. Nomo, that's a pitcher named Nomo. When he would pitch in the United States, the people of Japan would watch with TV screens as large as this wall. They'd watch by the thousands, even though in Japan it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning while their idol Nomo was pitching. But anyway, they began to learn Western dances. They saw they had to elevate women. Women were at first suppressed, as was the case in Japan throughout much of history. But then they saw they had to elevate women in order to advance. And your book states that without women, it's doubtful that Japan would have built up the military-industrial complex it did. The women did a lot of the work, and in some cases they could do some of the work better than the men. Japan began a program of conquest, taking China's territory. They got involved in disputes with China over Korea. And as they competed for Korea, Japan won. When rebellion broke out in Korea, Japan took one side and China took the other. Again, Japan defeated China badly. Russia also went in and competed for Chinese territory and for Korea. And at this point, the Japanese did something we're going to do later. In 1905, Japan made a sneak attack on Port Arthur. And they defeated the Russian Navy at Port Arthur. And this was a big humiliation for the Russians. It was the first time an Asian nation had defeated a European country, a major European country. Now, I mentioned how the Ethiopian African nation defeated Italy. This time it was Japan made a sneak attack at Port Arthur in 1905, and it got the Japanese what they wanted. Therefore, they were tempted to do it again. And on December 7th, 1941, Japan invaded the United States at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Only this time it did not work like it did against the Russians. But Japan was thinking when they invaded Pearl Harbor that we'll get our way this time like we got our way with the Russians. Japan conquered Korea and annexed Korea and made Korea part of Japan. A lot of the Germans and French and Russians became alarmed. They got together, Germany, France, and Russia, and they forced Japan to give the Liaodong Peninsula back to China. This was a setback, of course, for the Japanese. The way our history book put it, folk, and this might sound racial, but when I was young, it said that the rest of the nations of the world began to take notice of this nation of little brown men. That's what they were called then, the nation of little brown men. Today, of course, we don't use that kind of terminology, but in those days they did. Japan and the United States became suspicious of each other, and as we all hopefully know by now, this suspicion was to lead to war. Okay, so much for Japan. Again, Japan, if you remember nothing else, They copied Western ways more than other countries, and it enabled them to, even though they were smaller than China, enabled them to defeat China, take some territory. And we'll take leave of them there and go on to chapter 23. This will make it easier on me.